Monday, October 20th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me on Twitter, JB Fantasy Sports. Alongside me every week, Jake Letarski at RotoJake. We're going to be going over the priority waiver wire ads, if you want to call it that, after a week 7 that was interesting. And of course, entering part 1, or I guess maybe part 2 of Buy-Mageddon here, as 6 teams are on bye here in week 8, and then another 4 on week 9, moving forward with a lot of critical teams. So if the juncture of roster availability was not already difficult entering this week, here's going to be a lot of challenges, and probably making things more frustrating for a lot of managers, Jake, is that it's another relatively bleak waiver wire period. At least there weren't any cataclysmic injuries. I know Brian Thomas Jr. had the shoulder injury that might be serious. Jags on bye. We don't really know what that looks like, but otherwise it wasn't too consequential. But that also means that there aren't many massive or additional waiver wire pickups. I felt like I went pretty extensive in the waiver wire article. It's posted up on RotoWire right now, or going to be posted momentarily. But otherwise, we try to discuss 10 names at least to
exactly
pick up. This might be a tough list this week.
Yeah, we have a lot of names for you this week, but right now they're just names. I don't see anyone that you're spending more than 10% of your fab on, unless we highlight a lot of guys that have surprisingly low availability but don't quite meet our thresholds. Unless one of those guys happens to be out there and you need a start, then I could see spending a lot of fab. But as far as the guys that had semi breakout games this week, there are some flags about the sustainability of that production, and we'll walk you through all that.
Well, let's kick things off with I would imagine who will be number 1 on a lot of people's lists. I don't think ours, but overall waiver wire conversations. Oronde Gadsden, rookie tight end for the Chargers, 5th round pick. We have talked about him, I would say now, a month straight. Yep. I feel really proud, at least for us, that we cover our bases with this. I talk about being the most psychotic waiver wire article out there in the fantasy community because I just mentioned 30 names per week. By default, if I don't have a guy like Gadsden on there multiple weeks, I've done my job incorrectly, and I know we've talked about him before. Mm-hmm. People are going to look at the numbers, be wowed by that. The Chargers passed 55 times against the Colts, and it's because they were trailing from the rip. You have this matchup now Thursday against a Vikings defense that's been pretty good against opponent tight ends. Watch Dallas Goedert, who was a tight end 1 streamer week in and week out, do nothing against the Vikings last week. Of course, that was partly because A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith did a lot. But where is Gadsden? You said there's no waiver wire pickup that should be above 10%. Mm-hmm. I think I have Gadsden a bit higher if he is available in your league, any leagues, but that one's a tough one to call.
Yeah, so I put Oronde Gadsden at number 3 overall in my list. That's because, out of all the positions, there are a handful of tight ends that are similarly serviceable, but a few things changed with Gadsden. He had his second consecutive week with a 77% route run rate. Those are his 2 highest of the year. He played 58 of 74 snaps. That's 78%. And then, of course, he ends with his career best game here, catches 7 of 9 targets for 164 yards and a touchdown. Now, of course, he's still 3rd on the team in targets. Ladd McConkey showed up. He had 15. Keenan Allen had 14. Quentin Johnston even returned, and he had 6. So, this is a Chargers team that wants to run primarily and then has all these pass-catching options at receiver here. So week to week, you're going to probably take a few lumps with Gadsden, but the usage is there and encouraging, and he passes the eye test. He did, of course, have the touchdown, but he nearly had another touchdown on a very impressive yards after the catch play where he kind of caught it in the middle of the field, broke outside, out-muscled some players. Oronde Gadsden passes the eye test for sure. Now, I only put him at number 3 because tight end streaming, there are a lot of options. Juwan Johnson's back in the radar this week after
you wanted to drop him.
7 targets. Yeah, exactly. Theo Johnson of the Giants, he got helped by the one big play, but he's still around. Colston Loveland came back. I'm not quite sure where that is. Even Harold Fannon's only 59%. So there are options out there at tight ends, but Gadsden definitely leads it this week. But I only put him at number 3 here because I think there are a couple of the other skill positions that are tougher to fill, I guess, with buys coming up that
there you go. Yep.
We maybe want to address first.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Gadsden probably is the top waiver wire pickup for me, but it's because I think about rest of season utility. I don't know if anyone can afford to do that in week 8. Again, with 6 teams on bye, 4 teams in week 9 as well, critical teams is on top of that. You might not have the roster flexibility to think, all right, if I have 2 tight ends, let's just say Tucker Kraft and Gadsden, like what does that look like? That might not be possible this week, but Gadsden, if you are able to afford to do so, has been fantastic. I do think it's the counterpunch for the Chargers, who are dealing with a bunch of offensive line injuries. Joe Alt didn't play, of course. They lost Rashawn Slater. We've mentioned this over and over. The audience that's been following us now for a month, Jake, knows all about this, but you had talked about Gadsden after the catch. That is the one thing that I feel will be replicable the entire season, is that if he's used in that capacity, he will be successful, and the Chargers have to use him that way with an unrelenting pass rush that continues to happen. They had lost 2 guys during the game with that Colts game as well too. So Gadsden, he is the top pickup for me. But I understand what you're saying with the other positions. And let's go to our cover boy, for example, Brashard Smith on the RotoWire YouTube side of things. I'm going to lump in Kyle Monagai because I think they're more or less the same genre of waiver wire pickup. Brashard Smith benefited, of course, in that monster win over the Raiders, gets 19 total touches, vastly outperforms his career high. I think that was in large part because that game was over in the first quarter, and no Max Crosby made it doubly so for the Raiders, who are just toothless at this point. And then Monagai gets a bunch of work because DeAndre Swift entered the game with a groin injury, still gets a lot of playing time as himself. And then the weather was super windy and rainy, which would have allowed the running game to also be beneficial too. So of the two, Monagai and Brashard Smith, rest of season, is there value in that, or are they kind of more like just 1 week plays next week?
Yeah, we're going to see. I ended up ranking Brashard Smith number 1 on my pickups. Honestly, I wanted to rank Jackson Dart number 1 because technically at 42% rostered, he fits the bill. And Jackson Dart had an amazing game against the Broncos of all teams, who you would think was going to be the death of fantasy players. But Jackson Dart went out and did his thing. I think he's 5th in fantasy points per game among all quarterbacks, and again, doing it in the tough matchup makes him there. But despite that 42% number, I'm seeing him rostered across every single one of my leagues, and has been that way for a couple weeks now here. So check that, because with 6 teams on bye, you're going to have to find quarterback streamers. But kind of looking past that, because we have featured Jackson Dart quite a bit on the show, I did put Brashard Smith number 1. But again, like I said at the beginning of the show, there's nobody that I'm going more than 10% of fab on. This is a 7-8% bid if you need him. And the reason why is because Brashard Smith went out and outsnapped Kareem Hunt for, I believe it was the first time all year. Season best 36% snap share, 28 out of 61, compared to 43 out of 61 for Pacheco, who had 56%. Now, the yards per carry for Smith was not great, only 14 for 39. But what you're looking for with Brashard Smith is the pass catching potential. And he did catch all 5 of his targets for 42 yards receiving. Now, the one thing I want to note here is game flow. The Chiefs dominated for the entirety of this game, even though Mahomes played the whole game. Towards the end, it was never really close. And the crazy thing is the Raiders only ran 30 plays in this entire game. That's how much they were dominated in terms of time of possession. So yeah, the Chiefs have 75 plus plays to run. Of course, there's a lot more carries to go around than in a normal game, but I think Brashard Smith is starting to distinguish himself as a pass catching running back. And of course, there are less targets to go around with Rashee Rice back and getting a lot of targets, especially early. They wanted to establish Rashee Rice early, but Brashard Smith is a perfectly acceptable plug and play PPR option here, with a couple points floor due to that, due to that pass catching ability, and then somewhat of a ceiling if he can break one of these eventually. And, we'll see not much usage around the red zone, but, that could always get scripted to him a little bit there. But, upcoming, he's got the Commanders this week, who, again, the Commanders are one of the most injured teams in all of football here, and you can expect them to play from ahead in that game as well. And, Commanders are 20th against opposing backs in half PPR. Then they're at Buffalo, who are 29th, and then they have a bye week here. So Brashard Smith takes the top spot over Monagai by just a hair, but it's really 1A and 1B if we're talking about running backs this week.
So I think let's do this conversation slightly differently than what I'd imagine a lot of other Waiver Wire podcasts are out there. And there's a bunch of great fantasy content. They're going to talk about the players themselves. I liked Brashard Smith entering the year. Kyle Monagai in super deep leagues, especially dynasty leagues, I liked as well too. I like both these rookie running backs. Overall, the rookie running back class, I think, has done more or less what we expected. Maybe Genty hasn't been quite that. Amari Hampton's been injured, and Henderson has been getting very little playing time for the Patriots. But I think what we had talked about entering the year more or less played out. How you should think about Brashard Smith was a couple of years ago when Jerick McKinnon was literally a league winner. That in every best case scenario that works out in Smith's favor, and there's a few that we have to discuss, we could be talking about a guy that gets 5 plus targets a game, gets 2 or 3 carries, will be used in the red zone. We have watched Andy Reid do this over a number of years in his career as a head coach. We watched Patrick Mahomes use Brashard Smith that same way. If the Chiefs acquire a Jerome Ford or Breece Hall, which we keep talking about on the show now for the past couple weeks, that's out the door. If Pacheco ends up looking as healthy and I think defined as a runner as he has been the past couple weeks, that also makes the Jerick McKinnon comparison out the door as well. So there's multiple things that have to happen before you can have Brashard Smith be that guy. I would almost argue that Brashard Smith is a 1-week pickup and play, like you talked about the Commanders' defense, and maybe you could speculate in the future. Kyle Monagai, same thing. DeAndre Swift gets the groin injury. We talked about the weather conditions. That's why Monagai plays as much as he did this week. The Bears could trade for Breece Hall as well, too. They're in the thick of things for a playoff race, and we know that Ben Johnson values having multiple running backs to use. I think Breece Hall actually would be a great fit for that scheme in the years to come as well, too. So that's the only issue I have is here's our top 3 waiver wire pickups, one being Oronde Gadsden, who I think is dependent on the offensive line being banged up, and then 2 running backs that are more like 1-week streamers that maybe have rest of season utility if multiple things go their way.
Exactly. Now we'll run over all the stashes and stuff when we get to the running back specific portion of the show because that's where it is. But Monagai did make my top 5. He had a season high rush share, almost 40%, season high snap share, 46% against the Saints. Now, again, that didn't stop DeAndre Swift from his second straight game of 20-plus fantasy points. He was out there for 52% of the snaps. So DeAndre Swift's still a very viable option. But Monagai ended up with 13 carries for 81 yards and a score, and he caught 2 of his 3 targets, whereas Swift only got 1 target. The big thing with Monagai, which actually as we got closer and closer to the show and I'm looking at the outline, I almost wanted to put Monagai over Smith, and the reason for that is his upcoming games. He's at Baltimore, who's 31 against opposing running backs, and at Cincinnati, who's 32. So these Bears running backs have the best possible schedule here, and I'm going to definitely be looking to use them in daily formats here for these next couple of games. You know, we'll see what the quarterback situation in Baltimore is next week. Could make that game a little bit more competitive, but no, everything about Monagai, it was a breakout game, and the usage is there. You know, he'll be at best 1B to DeAndre Swift, who I still think is an every week starter in fantasy, especially these next 2 weeks. But yeah, absolutely. Monagai is definitely on the radar, and you know, we'll get to all the handcuff stash type players here. But guys like Monagai and now Brashard Smith, both are looking like they have some standalone value, even when the 1A option on their roster is healthy. And yes, of course, the Bears got game flow this week, similar to the Chiefs. They played the Saints. The game was a little bit closer on the scoreboard, but I don't really know how much the Bears were threatened, you know, at that point here. So, yeah, a couple of running backs to look at this week. Of course, you're going to have the Gibbs Montgomery on bye, Genty's on bye, Kyron Williams is on bye, your Cardinals mess of streamers, the Kenneth Walker Charbonnet is on bye this week, Travis Etienne. I mean, it's a bye-mageddon for sure. This is as bad as it gets, and both of these guys are going to end up in a lot of starting lineups this week.
You mentioned Jackson Dart not quite making the top 5 list, in large part due to the roster rate. We try to talk about players under 50% rostered, if not a little bit lower. I think
Dart is 42%. I really thought about, when I was struggling for numbers 4 and 5 on my list this week, I thought about just, screw it, put Jackson Dart at number 1.
Well,
he's the first guy to look for.
I'm fine with you acknowledging that because I need to take my L here in this. There have been multiple people when Jackson Dart was announced as the starter, again, dating back a couple weeks ago to the Giants, saying pick up Dart right away. A friend of RotoWire, Brian Drake, friend of myself overall, was one of those guys on Twitter, also just a great find overall from a fantasy perspective. Talk about Jackson Dart. I was vehemently like, no. Talk to me about Jackson Dart after the stretch that has multiple Eagles, the Broncos game as well, too, of the Niners coming up. Dart has been awesome. And I couldn't have been more wrong. And I think this goes back to if we think the quarterback is mobile, which, frankly, every young quarterback now coming into the league is. Maybe Shedeur Sanders is going to be the one, ironically, that won't be. We know Dylan Gabriel doesn't quite do that as well, too, for the Browns. But if you have mobility and you're able to make plays off structure, that can have fantasy utility. Dart has outperformed every expectation I had for him. And I also wasn't really low on him either. I just thought it was a tough first month for him to start his career. Really impressive. I agree with you. Rest of season, Jake, that's one of those pickups I'd rather have. If you have to stream quarterback this week, the one I mentioned was Michael Penix in the article, gets the Dolphins, which I imagine are going to be firing Mike McDaniel here in the next 48 hours. I could be wrong, but that team is just It has lost all life and emotion. And if Michael Penix is playing, this is at home with Atlanta, it's almost possible that game gets out of hand where Penix doesn't get to produce points because the Falcons have just murdered the Dolphins to that degree. But until that point, like, Michael Penix probably is leading for me among the quarterback streamers. So you mentioned Jackson Dart. I had to take my L, and I think just factoring in the quarterback play as well too was one of those I want to mention. Is there anybody else on your top 5 list that you want to talk about this week?
Yeah, I mean, obviously receivers are going to get mentioned here, are going to be needed here in Mageddon. And the big breakout receiver that we had this week was Xavier Legette of the Panthers here. And it kind of, it seemingly came out of nowhere a little bit because in what should be a dream matchup against the Cowboys, he only had a couple targets and didn't really get anything going. This week, he breaks out with a season-high 11 targets. And, that's always significant to me when someone is suddenly getting double-digit targets in a game that, the Panthers were ahead. So, not by much. It was a close game. But, so I just wanted to talk about Legette a little bit. He led the team, 35.5% target share, ended up catching 9 of those for 92 yards and a score. This is the same game in which Ted McMillan only got 5 targets, caught 3 of them for 33 yards. And then Jalen Coker was also back, but didn't catch either of his targets. Nobody outside of Xavier Legette and Ted McMillan had more than 3 targets. So, yeah, part of me wonders what changed here after he's quiet in the Dallas matchup, has 5 targets combined in his last 2 games. So there is some flash in the pan fluke potential here. And I want to warn that. But and also with the Panthers here, we'll get to this a little bit more in the 2 quarterback situation. But Bryce Young has a high ankle sprain, is going to miss week 8, it looks like. And then, who knows what's going on beyond that. So we'll definitely see. And then,
well, hold on, Jake. I think this is correct. Uncle Ted has this correct in the chat. If you guys are listening to the podcast version, always appreciate your interest and audience. But we also have this up on the YouTube, RotoWire YouTube channel live as well. Sauce Gardner was on Ted McMillan for the majority of that game against the Panthers. We talk about path of least resistance often. And for offenses, the idea is, all right, well, how can I win this football game with the least resistance possible? Maybe it is Rico Dowdle getting involved, and you have Chuba Hubbard getting carries, and don't overexpose Bryce Young. The way I would be overexposing Bryce Young is trying to still force throws to Sauce Gardner's side. When Sauce is covering Ted McMillan, you have a guy like Xavier Legette ending the benefits. I think that's one of the reasons, but it's still nice to see that it's nice to see Legette finally do something after 2 years. And if Bryce Young is out, Andy Dalton, is I think kind of the same as Joe Flacco and Jacoby Brissett, where I almost wonder if the offense functions better with a veteran quarterback knowing how to make reads like that.
Yeah, it's no question why they're playing Bryce Young, and that's the future. And you want to get that development to the season where that they don't really have playoff aspirations. Right. But if it were try to fight to 8-8 win now type deal, then Dalton might maybe plays a little bit more. But only one, from what I can see, quickly running over the game log, only one of those 11 targets was to Xavier, or was from Dalton. But it was also a big 33-yard completion that helped seal the game here. So I think Dalton actually raises the ceiling for all of those receivers, and Legette is somebody that at least out of I've got like 8 more wide receiver names to throw out here, but I think Legette separates himself a little bit from the rest just based on that huge target volume, some upgrade getting Dalton. And then, of course, the next 3 games, Buffalo, Green Bay, New Orleans, those are all like real middle of the pack teams against receivers. So there aren't any crazy red flag matchups there. And I guess that helps his case a little bit too.
Well, let's circle back to your final top 5 pick, Jake, when we do the receiver section, because I kind of want to draw the line that whether it be Oronde Gadsden, Brashard Smith, Kyle Monagai, your streaming quarterbacks, or if you want to throw Xavier Legette in there, that's sort of what we're looking at for this week from a waiver wire perspective. Again, with 6 teams on bye, a few of them aren't consequential fantasy-wise, but just sheer attrition is going to be a big deal. And either be it at RotoJake on Twitter, at JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter. I put this in the article. I encourage you guys to download the RotoWire Discord if you want to message me individually there. I suspect, as we're seeing in the chat right now, individuals are going to have separate questions about waiver wire pickups than what we might have of this list. So while we could talk about players that we think we pick up, and in our leagues, our 12-team, 14-team leagues, it's a lot different than users out there. So whether it be reaching out to us on Twitter, I'm not giving out our emails, but if you Discord as well too, the comment section of the waiver wire article, if you have individual waiver wire issues, we'll be glad to go over them with you over the variety of different platforms that we have. But let's get a word from our sponsors here. First, Chalkboard, who I have been enjoying working with throughout the entire year. Cash in on your NFL picks this season with Chalkboard. Simply choose more or less on your favorite player stats to win up to 5,000 times your money from a limited time, or for a limited time only. New players get $20 free with no deposit required. Yeah, You heard that right. 20 free just on sign up. See why over 1 million fans have already locked in with Chalkboard to turn their sports knowledge into cold, hard cash. Whether you're locking the perfect slip with alternate lines using the cash out feature to take your money and run, or hammering the daily promos, today is your chance to win up to $40,000 on a single entry. Stop sitting on the sidelines. Get into the game with Chalkboard Fantasy Sports, now available in 30 plus states. Download Chalkboard today and use promo code ROTONFL. That's ROTONFL to get $20 free with no deposit required. We had talked about the streaming quarterbacks, Jake, and just overall, with 6 teams on bye, we're probably going to run into this. If Jackson Dart is not available, who are the options people should be looking at if you really need to find a quarterback for this week?
Yeah, exactly. Huge bye week. You look to Jackson Dart first. There are 2 ones that we bolded out of the whole list of streamers here. You mentioned Michael Penix in the article. That's fine. He still hasn't shown me a whole lot this year. I actually highlighted Joe Flacco against the Jets. Now, of course, we have the Sauce Gardner situation there as well here, but T. Higgins has actually been picking up his production over his last few games, and he could still be a productive asset there. Joe Flacco's only 11% rostered against the Jets here. You mentioned Miami. The coaching situation should be a serious issue this week here. Michael Penix, who didn't do much last night, could be a decent streaming option here at home. I'm not quite buying the Aaron Rodgers resurgence yet.
I was going to ask.
He had a big game against this one of the worst defenses against any fantasy position here, and is relying on those tight ends so much. So you could take the Aaron Rodgers revenge game narrative there if you'd like here, but I'm looking more. Yeah, I guess I'm looking more towards Flacco, given he's got a few weeks with this offense and he's got some weapons there that he can work. And again, it's only a 1-week thing. You don't need to be rostering Joe Flacco. But once again, type in Jackson Dart first. Just make sure that he's taking. Also, with buys and injuries and whatnot, Brock Purdy got down to 72% roster, and he's looking like he might have a chance to come back this week. It's worth checking there because both Dart and even Purdy, I guess, would be worth a decent fab bid here. The rest of these, you can kind of throw $1, $2, 1 or 2% on and see what you come up with and be okay. And there's going to be a ton of I have a whole half a page on 2 quarterback league updates here because that's where the injury carnage really happened this week. There'll be 1 or 2 options that will get you through the week if you have to, but you just might have to wait a little longer to see what the news is there.
I think I'm going to bet on the Aaron Rodgers revenge game happening. And here's the reason for it. We have watched this Packers defense get terrorized by the tight end position all year. Trey McBride was absolutely nuclear for literally everyone was expecting that to happen and it still did. I have no idea why the Packers defense allowed that. And the Steelers' one advantage, I'd say, offensively over this Packers defense, which isn't very good outside of Micah Parsons, is that they have utility in Darnell Washington and Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith. Like it goes into the one disadvantage the Packers seem to have. I think Rodgers is uniquely capable of diagnosing the defense, even if Jeff Hafley's throwing things. And Rodgers is going to be motivated. I think Mike Tomlin is also motivated to have his guy, Aaron Rodgers, look good against the Packers. I don't know if Rodgers is a guaranteed top 20 scorer or top 18, but if I need to stream quarterbacks, I'd rather do that than a lot of these other 2 QB routes.
Exactly. And I'll note that we saw Trey McBride torch the Packers this week. He was the one guy that really hurt the Packers defense. And like you said, we'll talk about this maybe in tight ends, but Rodgers goes to those Steelers tight ends. Those are his primary targets in the passing game. DK Metcalf has a largely disappointing fantasy season because those tight ends are sucking up all the targets. And the Packers have that really good pass rush. Wyatt has hurt that a little bit. The Packers have largely been good against the run and then fine against the pass. But I think, the cornerbacks, which is, after Jair Alexander went, no one's arguing that move here, but that was always kind of a bit of a concern about the defense. And it hasn't been as big of a deal because they can play 2 high safeties and they have such a good front 7 at stopping the run. So the corners haven't been exposed yet, but it's possible they will be. At some point this year. So, we'll wait and see how that goes. Maybe there's a possible Rodgers game, but I'm not necessarily banking on it yet. But primetime Sunday Night Football next week, a couple of 4-win teams. It's going to be some elite viewing, at least we'll say that.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the 2 QB part of this. Jaden Daniels, it injures his hamstring. It's a second, I think, consequential injury for the season. Commanders have a very difficult 3-game stretch upcoming here. Marcus Mariota has been fine, at least if you've had to in the past to use him. Against the Chiefs, though, I'm very nervous, and that's also if Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel don't play as well.
I want to mention that when Marcus Mariota was taking over earlier in the year, he had those weapons, and he may not. Both Deebo and McLaurin were out this week. You have to think that at least McLaurin's getting pretty close to a return, but we'll see. As far as the other 2 quarterback leagues, we met our options here. We mentioned Bryce Young leaving in the third quarter with an ankle injury. The X-rays were negative, but then he gets a high ankle sprain. Now we know he's probably going to miss week 8, possibly more. So Andy Dalton is the next man up there. Justin Fields got benched on Sunday. Still TBD whether it's Fields or Tyrod Taylor, but either way, they're on the road against Cincinnati, and that's a pretty great matchup here. So you definitely want to acknowledge that whoever starts that game might be better if Garrett Wilson comes back. Maybe Mason Taylor, who I thought was in a smash spot this week, didn't quite live up. That offense is just totally inept. But if there's a week they're capable of scoring 20 points, it's got to be against the Bengals here. Want to throw a couple other notes here. Got to look at the Vikings and J.J. McCarthy. He returned to practice this week, but was inactive as the emergency third quarterback. It sounds like the Vikings don't really want him back starting until he's 100%. So week 9 might be the target. And there's a great string of matchups there at Detroit, who's 26, versus Baltimore, who's 31, versus Chicago, 28. So we're going to talk about Vikings streamers possibly next week, but this week it's really tough to go ahead and stash someone like McCarthy, who's not even who's a fringe option anyway. And you're going to have just a bench crunch this week, one way or another. So, I mean, maybe he's one of those, if you have an open IR spot that you can use someone like that, grab him and go for it. So just wanted to mention that, especially because of the upcoming schedule. And then of course, the Cardinals here, I'm sitting there watching that Packer game thinking, man, I kind of wish Kyler Murray was their quarterback.
Oh yeah.
Jacoby Brissett has played pretty well, at least has made them competitive in games during the Kyler Murray absence. But head coach Jonathan Gannon clarified today that Kyler Murray is still the starter when healthy. But of course the team has a week 8 bye here. So, there's not really much actionable you can do with that here. You're still sitting on Kyler Murray. I actually wouldn't be surprised if Kyler Murray got cut in a lot of leagues. But if you're fortunate enough to somehow have avoided Mageddon this week, then you think about maybe grabbing him too, because he'll be back in week 9.
The running back waiver wire pickups, I think, could be actually really easy buzz through, but we'll circle back to those here in just a second. Get a word from our sponsors. Circa Stadium Swim. It's football season, and the best place to catch the games is at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas, featuring the best pool in history, Stadium Swim. Stadium Swim has 3 levels, 6 pools, and 143-foot diagonal screen. Whether it's Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Stadium Swim is America's favorite place to watch football. No matter the size of your group, Stadium Swim is the place for you. From owner suites to cabanas, day beds to stadium booths, there are a bunch of different seating choices for everyone. And the best part is Stadium Swim is open 365 days a year. That matters for us here in Wisconsin when it starts to get a little bit colder. With temperature-controlled pools, it's a great place to catch the games all season long. Stadium Swim located at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Book today at circalasvegas.com. All right, last week
I want to give some love to Stadium Swim, because it's not just NFL Sundays. I went there and it was unlike anything I've ever seen. But my favorite spot to watch UFC fights in Vegas too. Out there. I went there just to, I landed thinking maybe I'd buy a ticket to the UFC event, and then it got to be like, oh, it's $800 for standing room. No thanks. I went to Stadium and watched the whole UFC pay-per-view in the pool, and I was like, I'm never buying a ticket to T-Mobile ever again. Stadium Swim rules for that. So
that's a great call.
Just a shout out, hot Vegas tip, but also just a shout out to our partners there, because they make that experience amazing. They get, you have all the sports, but then they get the pay-per-view and it blows up, and then the sun sets and you're watching this. It's an outstanding experience. And
the pool is like legitimately warm too. Like that'd be the other part for me. Again, coming from Wisconsin, like I would want it to be like a warmer place.
When it's 98 degrees at 9 o'clock at night, you don't have to worry about the pool temperature really. But but yeah, no, it's an amazing experience. Recommend everyone gets out and tries that, whether you're staying at Circa or not.
All right, let's talk about the running backs again. Last week we talked about Kamani Vidal, and I think this is important context because Vidal will have utility from a starting perspective for multiple weeks until Amari Hampton comes back, or in addition, if the Chargers end up trading for running back, which could be happening in the near future. This week, when it's debating between Brashard Smith or Monagai, I like the rest of season outlook if you can afford to do so with 6 teams on bye, but the reality is multiple things have to go right for a Brashard Smith or Kyle Monagai to have that rest of season outlook actually work out in your favor. So I had mentioned at the top of the show, we'll do it again here, I keep comparing Brashard Smith best case scenario to that year or a couple of years ago where Jerick McKinnon won people leagues when Andy Reid was using him as a pass catching specialist. Brashard Smith is a good enough runner, but where he'll make his bones in fantasy is getting those targets. He had gotten 3 in each of the past 3 games prior to this past week. You're going to see the workload bump up like, oh, is this happening? Is Brashard Smith a thing? No, it's the Chiefs that were just annihilating the Raiders throughout basically the entirety of that game. And the same goes for Kyle Monagai, who gets a bunch of touches, but I think that's due to the weather and also that the Bears were up and DeAndre Swift dealing with a groin injury. He can't take 40 touches in a game. Nobody should. That's where Monagai ended up getting a lot of work as well this week.
Exactly. And yeah, just as I had him Brashard Smith 1A, Monagai 1B. And honestly, they're close enough, especially with the Monagai schedule. If you're joining us late, he's got games at Baltimore and at Cincinnati, the 2 worst defenses against opposing backs in half PPR formats coming up. Honestly, if it's a standard league and no PPR, I would probably put Monagai 1A and Smith 1B. But I think PPR is a little more common, so it was more appropriate to go Brashard Smith. I want to mention stashes. Or not stashes, but like a couple guys to check on before we kind of try to rank the stashes here.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So you had a great reminder in your injury article today, which you can check out, or your waiver wire article, which you can check out on RotoWire shortly after the show here. But Trey Benson is down to 56%, and it's not like Michael Carter or Bam Knight have emerged here. And I think Bam Knight got a little bit banged up in that Packer game, if I remember correctly.
He came back in the game, but he did leave it for about like 2 drives.
But yeah, Trey Benson down at 56%. Now, again, I get it here. It's 6 teams on bye. You're not really stashing guys, and especially when Benson might have a couple more weeks to go here. But I definitely never cut Benson in the stake league, and I certainly don't intend to, because I think
there you go.
In the second half of the season here, he's going to get back on the fantasy radar in a big way. I also weirdly wanted to mention Aaron Jones. His window to return is going to open up week 8. We don't know if that's official yet, but he's down to 77% roster, which is still a lot. Obviously he was drafted at the start, so you get the managers that don't manage or abandon their teams that helping that. If you look at Yahoo Diamond leagues, he's only 47% rostered, so his earliest return date is week 8. The Vikings already had their bye. Maybe look to grab him, maybe even as a chip in a trade as they get healthy. Because It's not like Jordan Mason has taken the world on fire here, and the Vikings will eventually get healthier there. So look at him maybe if you can afford a stash. Also, after the week 6 bye, Woody Marks got down to 53%. I know he had the one breakout game, then Nick Chubb kind of took back over in week 5. So just keep an eye on his Monday Night Football performance and really the usage tonight. If he has a good game tonight, then he could definitely get back on the radar too. And he's somebody that I had to hold on and start in a couple places. So we'll see there. So just check on a few guys here before we start to try to rank these stashes.
The biggest stash, and I have been saying it for a couple weeks now, if you can afford to do so with 6 teams on bye, is Isaiah Davis, running back for the Jets. I will be shocked if over the next 2 weeks, Breece Hall is still on the New York Jets. There's no reason why they should be rostering at this point. That team is completely defunct. You could argue that Isaiah Davis probably still isn't a rosterable play in shallow leagues because this offense is so miserably bad. Breece Hall leaving will make it worse. But if you are the Jets and get draft capital for a guy in a lost season, do so. And I think he'll do so with the market that needs running backs out there. Isaiah Davis is going to be one I keep recommending, and I want at least all of the RotoWire listeners and followers who listen and talk to us, Jake, to be the ones that benefit from this, because there's going to be a point in, I'm just going to say the next week, where we're having this conversation about Isaiah Davis as the top waiver wire pickup, and nobody here who's been following us all season should be in that same spot. So that's my favorite stash for sure.
Yeah, and I want to mention this is a good time to mention some breaking news that we got after the show started. Kendre Miller is believed to have a torn ACL for the Saints. And Kendre Miller was a frequent stash mention here. And so now, they're the Alvin Kamara trade rumors. Kamara doesn't want to get traded. The money doesn't make sense, as you've laid out several times for us, and helped educate me in that situation here. But now we're moving down the depth chart. If there's a Kamara handcuff, the only real option there is Devin Neal. He only had 1 carry this past week. He was a 6th-round pick this year, but he bumps up to RB2 and is going to be on the radar in, I think, He's the type of guy I'll put on a bid in our 14-team Superflex and in Fishbowl, perhaps, just to see and sit on and see how it goes here. But there are other handcuffs that I like a little bit better. Some aren't true handcuffs necessarily that are getting a little bit of work, but you have to rank Tyler Algier. Again, in this situation, he's 38% rostered, high upside backup handcuff, vultures goal line carry here or there. Didn't do anything crazy on Sunday night, but he's in the conversation. Blake Corum's down to 11%. A bunch of people cut him after a dud last week, but he actually tied with Kyron Williams with 12 carries, only played 21 snaps out of 59 possible snaps compared to 37 for Kyron Williams, but it was still Corum's second highest total all season. So that's something to watch for. And maybe not this week, but next week, look at the Jaguars. They're on bye this week. Travis Etienne hasn't ran super well after a fast start to the season. It's not like Bashil Tutin has ran really well either, but Tutin's only at 40% right now. He had 5 carries to Etienne's 8 in that blowout in London. Tutin's ownership will go down a lot, and he might be someone to grab here after their bye. So any of those guys you want to elaborate on? They're kind of quick hitters, stashes, guys that may not help you this week, but, looking ahead type deal.
Yeah, Rams also to buy, so the Blake Corum part of this, they're not playing this week too, but I like that one. The Devin Neal part is really interesting, and that was breaking news as the show was going on. I loved Devin Neal from a draft perspective. I thought he was going to be closer to a 4th or 5th round selection, not a 6th round pick. And I was surprised that the Saints added a bunch of other veterans. Cam Akers at one point was on that roster. They added Velus Jones as well too. And it was like, well, okay, if the Saints are adding all these guys, they must not believe in Devin Neal. And then Kendre Miller earning time over Devin Neal too. I really still have not lost conviction on Devin Neal as a prospect that I'm interested in. I just feel like the Saints have told us a bunch of things with how they view this depth chart at running back, and I'm a little bit more cautious. For example, some of the chat was mentioning Jaden Blue right now with Javonte Williams doing great for the Cowboys, but no Miles Sanders rest of the year. I would rather have Jaden Blue than Devin Neal. I'd rather have Brashard Smith and Kyle Monagai as well too. So just keep that in context as we're talking about a new name we haven't discussed before. It doesn't necessarily mean that we like that guy more than anyone else we've mentioned over the past 3 or 4 weeks now.
Yeah, I mean, Jaden Blue, 7 carries for 29 yards, and he caught his only target here. Again, that was with the Cowboys just completely blowing out the Commanders. So he's definitely interesting. I overlooked that name. He deserves a mention in this type of list.
Let's get a word from our sponsors real quick here at Blue Wire. Okay, we're back, and we had talked about at the top 5 portion of the show, the receiver section is going to get muddy. I want to just kind of illustrate this right now. I don't know if there is any receiver that is actually worth picking up. Isn't to say if there weren't 6 teams on bye, I don't know if any one of these receivers I'd actually pick up outright play. But we might not have that choice. Mm-hmm. So going into this list, I want people to understand that the value of this is not great. In fact, we've had lots of other better options, but this is a bleak spot if you are in desperate need of a wide receiver play. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, that is going to be the answer here for Week 8.
Yeah, exactly. It's tough for receivers, but there are some names that we definitely have to go down the road. I mentioned Xavier Legette at the top. Obviously, there's the Sauce Gardner effect on Ted McMillan that led to Legette's target share this week. But he's an interesting name. Anyone with 11 targets you have to consider here. And then there's a lot of guys that are kind of on the same play for me. I initially was close, but didn't. I wanted to put Chimere Dike in the top 5 towards the end. He's only like 6% rostered.
Rookie for the Titans.
Yes, exactly. Rookie for the Titans. He had a breakout game of sorts, I guess you could say, with Calvin Ridley out. Yep. Caught all 4 of his targets for 70 yards and a touchdown. Weird game for Tennessee. Tony Pollard actually led the team in targets with 6. Alec Iomenor is still the top option there, I think. He had 5 targets. But it's a pretty decent matchup at the Colts this week. Now, the Colts are 31 against opposing receivers in half PPR. A lot of that is because they get out to these leads because of how surprisingly good they've been. But, it's a matchup that DK could get a little action in garbage time if Ridley has to miss the game again. So he works in there as well.
Yeah, and DK gets the long touchdown, like I want to say 45 yards, basically does nothing else because the Titans offense is just so bad. I liked Cam Ward entering the year. That hasn't been awesome. I still blame a lot on the offensive line, but to the overall point, okay, let's rostered Chimere Dike or Io Manor, right? Neither one at this point if Calvin Ridley's going to be out for foreseeable future. Also a candidate, I think, to be traded along with Jacoby Myers of the world, Calvin Ridley, if he goes for like a 6th round pick. That's one of those guys we're all going to overreact to. And I think
I actually looked up Calvin Ridley's contract. Some team's going to have to eat like $23 million if they want to do that. Because I remember thinking, like, wait a minute, the Titans are terrible. They're tanking. Why don't they? Ridley clearly isn't happy there. They're not using them. Why don't they trade them? Oh, that's why. Thanks, Spot Track, for the reminder.
So after Chimere Dike, it's a little bit difficult. We mentioned Xavier Legette as well, too. Jalen Coker, I picked up in Stake League, going to be dropping because that didn't work out. But overall, there's a long list of guys that, like, if you're desperate, and I think truly desperate, you could look at. I mentioned Malik Washington in the article, gets 8 targets, leads the way for the Dolphins. Malik Washington was one of those guys we thought post Tyreek Hill injury, will he get the bump? It had been Jalen Waddle when the offense was able to function. When there's 50-mile-per-hour winds and rain the entire time, the Dolphins, I think rightly, didn't want to throw the ball any further than 3 or 4 yards down the field. So Malik Washington has been and will continue to be their bubble specialist. I think that's why his volume ended up happening. And then a guy like Josh Reynolds, we didn't know with Garrett Wilson out for probably the next couple weeks, who is the best receiver if there is one. I talked about Mason Taylor last week. It ended up being Josh Reynolds leading the team in targets, even though nobody really looked good. The only positive I would say for Josh Reynolds is, well, if Tyrod Taylor's the quarterback, maybe the offense functions better, but this is bleak.
I think this is the offense that we're going to see regardless of who's at quarterback. I mean, Josh Reynolds had 93% route share and ended up with 9 targets, only caught 3 of them for 29. That type of efficiency is what you can look at. So I mentioned 10 targets, right. You're not going to see any kind of more than 50% target efficiency on this team with the quarterback play that we're getting. And we don't even know that it's going to be Taylor yet. So definitely there. I threw another name on here. Darnell Mooney's interesting. He caught 3 of his 5 targets for 68 yards and 49 snaps. That was his most in a game since week 4. He played 82% of the snaps. Now, it's still oddly Kyle Pitts, 10 targets, Drake London, 10 targets, Bijan Robinson, 8 targets. Those guys are ahead in the passing game, but Mooney's another factor there. He's home against Miami, who's 7, at New England, who's 19, and then at Indy, who's 31st against opposing receivers. He already had his bye week at least, so you don't have to worry about that. Desperation plug-and-play option there. I put Troy Franklin back on the list. For me, Troy Franklin is like that line, right? It's like
Kayshon Bouttie's my line. I guess I have like a higher opinion of myself when Kayshon Boutie's my line as opposed to Troy Franklin. Franklin has been droppable for the past couple weeks. So of course, he ends up having a crucial day against the Giants.
Again, in this huge comeback effort that the Broncos had, Troy Franklin had 10 targets and he scored. So, that's essentially the line for me, dropping Franklin quite a bit.
Worth noting that the score wasn't even a target to him. Like, it was such a badly thrown ball from Bo Nix that Troy Franklin ends up being the catching target. And that happened twice on the game-winning drive for the field goal as well. Bo Nix is targeting Troy Franklin and it ends up being Cortland Sutton or somebody else that catches the ball, or I think with Marvin Mims, unconsciously bad game for Bo Nix, and he still ends up winning the football game. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, exactly. And then, really, really digging deep here in the scrap heap, Chris Moore and Jalen Lane were the top receivers for the Commanders, while both Terry McLaurin and Samuel were out. So those are the guys there. But I even put them below like a Josh Reynolds here. And, of course, we got Mariota at the helm now probably. And those other guys will get healthy here. I also threw Jack Batch, increasing his snap share over the last few games here, 53%, 75%, 63%. Now, remember, the Raiders only ran 30 plays, so, he had 2 targets, but he did catch both. Jacoby Myers already has injuries, and he might be on the trade block. Batch was more significant than Thornton, at least in the passing game there. But again, scrap heap, big-time scrap heap for receivers this week. So, outside of Legette and DK, maybe Washington, you're doing the Jake Letarski hope you get lucky situation here.
Well, and that's for different things as well too, Jake. But yeah, Jake Besh as well, the 2nd round pick for the Raiders. I picked him in the Scott Fishbowl League. I was thinking, okay, with Myers out, maybe Besh, who has been getting more playing time over recent weeks, gets more opportunities. Raiders on bye now, but you could argue that we'll know what that situation is able to be resolved. As the trade deadline comes up the following week. It is not a speculative play because we're talking about one of the worst offenses in the league in the Raiders. But theoretically, if there's another target that emerges, if Jacoby Myers gets traded, Bowers might come back, make the offense better, and by default raises the floor for everyone. I mean, this is wish casting of all wish casting. The other one I almost mentioned in the article, Trey Tucker, 56% roster on Yahoo. He has been the one and will continue to be the one if Jacoby Myers is traded that really ends up getting the beneficiary. Jack Bash or Deontay Thornton, that's like if the Raiders offense ends up being closer to like top 12 in the league as opposed to 32nd in the league, which they have been the past couple of weeks. Are we good to move on to the tight end position?
Yeah, absolutely. We went far too deep on receivers, but that's where we're at.
It was important to discuss this again with 6 teams on bye that people might run into this issue. But before we get into the tight ends, which I do think adds some utility flex-wise if you need to, final word from our sponsors, Mega Sports. Elevate your game with the ultimate sports contest, Mega Sports Progressive. Dive into a world of excitement with 3 progressive jackpots and a chance to win big every week and every month. We're rewarding 1,500 lucky winners, distributing over $50,000 in monthly prizes. All you do, answer 15 sports props questions. Add up your correct responses for the week's cash prize and tally the week's total for huge monthly cash rewards. Mega Sports Pro makes it fun and easy to join. This is a thrilling opportunity to be part of a growing community of sports enthusiasts. Sign up today and unlock a chance to win big every day, every week, and every month. Sign up is free, no commitments, no credit cards. Your first 9 days of play are free. Visit megasportspro.com today. We talked about Oronde Gadsden. Somebody in the chat asked, is that person worth picking up? Yes, the 5th-round rookie for the Chargers is probably my top waiver wire pickup this week. Mm-hmm. I don't think you're going to see a line like we saw last week. That was due in part to the Chargers trailing and also the offensive line injuries that they dealt with throughout the game. But Gadsden has been getting more and more involved in the passing game. And like you pointed out, Jake, one of his best skill sets is the ability after the catch, which I think is going to happen plenty with all the injuries to the offensive line for the Chargers. So Gadsden's up that list.
Yeah, well, the 164-yard games are going to be few and far between, possibly never again. He's a big enough physical runner that's very difficult to bring down in the open field. So he'll get you, even if it's only 5-6 targets a game the rest of the way out, he'll get you your money's worth with those targets, with the possibility for the occasional jump ball touchdown, red zone type thing. I know they love going to Keenan Allen and McConkey, finding weird little windows here, but that run game is going to be stagnant for a couple of weeks now. And I don't know if 50 plus passes is realistic here, but there are a lot of targets here to go around here, and Gadsden will definitely get it. So Gadsden's arguably the top pickup this week here. So, getting the opportunity and the skills match.
After that, I think at tight end, there's interesting names. We had talked about Harold Fannin and Mason Taylor. If those guys are somehow still available, you could probably play them for future weeks. I know there are a few teams on bye there. Cade Otton, we're recording this Monday. We might have more of a resolution on Emeka Bukastass, and also how does Mike Evans fit into this? How long is Chris Godwin out? Maybe Cade Otton will have utility next week as well too. But otherwise, Juwan Johnson did okay. You have Theo Johnson gets the fluky touchdown for the Giants, but has been involved basically every game Jackson Dart's been quarterback. So there's a few more tight end Johnson options available.
Yeah, I like the way you put that here. But yeah, with Malik Neighbors out, the Giants, they're obviously it's a run heavy approach for this team, and Wan'Dale Robinson is really their only receiver of note. I mean, your little Jordan Humphrey, Jalen Hyatts of the world aren't really getting involved here. Daniel Bellinger actually had a good game, but Theo Johnson had the big touchdown this week. They've schemed him touchdowns in the past in the red zone, so that's a positive sign there. And then Juwan Johnson might be the actual tight end at drop line, because he has some disappointing weeks, but then he goes out and gets 7 targets, catches 5 of them for 79. That's significant. You mentioned at the top, check Harold Fannin, 59%. Njoku's banged up with that knee injury, and also Njoku has been a name that's been mentioned in trade conversations as well here. Yeah. So they like Fannin, and they're going to keep using him. I think Fannin's a better week-to-week play than a Jerry Jeudy, who have been frustratingly trotting out there to no avail. But Fannin is someone that we like there. And then I just wrote down here kind of as a note, but Colston Loveland is back, caught 3 of his 4 targets for 24 yards and no touchdowns here. I mean, Roma Dunes is going to get back on track. Maybe Luther Burden finds his way in eventually, but it's Loveland over Cole Kmet. We know at least that much here in terms of targets and usage here this week. So he's the guy that you take a look at, I guess, if you need it. But in leagues where Colston Loveland was relevant, your tight end premium, your super deep benches, he probably wasn't dropped during the injury. But if you need an emergency play, you spaz and forget about it until Sunday morning and are like, oh, all these good ones are gone. Yeah, you can grab Loveland. hope for the best.
I'll throw in both Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth as well. Again, that game happened Thursday with how bad the Packers defense has been against tight ends. I don't know who's been getting more usage. I feel like Freiermuth has not been involved, and it felt like just a weird game agath the Bengals. I could be wrong though. And I'll refer back to Jerry Donobene's box score breakdown, which it's posted Tuesday. YouTube 15 gets you 15% off the subscription to RotoWire. But Jerry's article is one of the best. I think it kind of delving into that stuff exactly. One of those two, between Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, will be tight end one worthy. I don't know who yet, and I want the data, and hopefully Jerry to kind of parse through that as well.
Well, here, I'll tell you this. The Steelers are the king of 2 tight end sets because 57 possible snaps on Thursday Night Football. We've got 40 of those for Jonnu Smith, 36 for Pat Freiermuth, and 37 for Pat Freiermuth, and 36 for Darnell Washington. Throw that in there too here. I promise you that between Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, whoever you pick up and start, the other one will score twice against the Packers. That is the one lock that we have here. I mean, this is one of those things as an analyst. I can't give you one of those two as a recommendation with any degree of confidence. It's just going to be someone's going to score. You can do it, but it's a dice roll for me, and they'll probably be on your drop radar next week. To be completely honest, you'll get frustrated. But then a week after that, someone's going to score twice, and we'll talk about them in the tight end section of the waiver wire. This is just kind of how this goes. I'm not really chasing the Freiermuth production as if there's some sort of big shift in this Steelers offense and how they're running.
That's totally fair. With 6 teams on bye, there's probably fewer defensive streaming options available, but you could probably talk about a few still this week.
Yeah, one stands out big time, and that is the Colts. It's kind of a cheat because they're 49% rostered here, but they are at home and they get the Titans, who haven't been able to do anything on offense here. Colts are probably your pick, and it might be even worth $1 fab bid just to secure that because with all the teams on bye, the other defenses aren't super great. You could take the Bills at home against Carolina. They're also up at 38%, but it's not like this offenses look super great or this defenses look super great all year either. And, maybe the Panthers are a little bit more threatening with Dalton at the helm, at least, with the garbage time production there. And then I wrote down Tampa Bay. I mean, their defense is bad. But Baker always bails them out. But they're only 10% rostered, and they're at the Saints, who, we'll see. Spencer Rattler makes that offense look competent from time to time with guys like Olave and Juwan Johnson and Kamara carrying things. It's possible, but, I was just looking at bad teams. I don't love using mediocre defenses on the road here, but Colts and Bills are your 2 options you're looking at first.
Well, there you go. That's the Week 8 Waiver Wire podcast here, of course, in the RotoWire network. I mentioned in the article, I'll say it one more time here, it's going to be a tricky week for everyone with 6 teams on bye. Whether you're talking to me, JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter, I have the comment section turned on for the Waiver Wire article. If you want to download our Discord, ask me questions individually. I want to be open and help you guys as best you can for your lives. Jake, same thing as well too.
Exactly.
Jake on Twitter. We're going to have to get through this. It's going to be difficult, but the easiest way for us to answer questions is to know specifics about your roster, your league, and what we're looking at ahead. Because I think it will be different individually.
I want to mention because you mentioned Discord a few times here. It's rotowire.com/chat. It's actually, we have a bunch of free chat rooms in the Discord. It used to be only if you had a RotoWire subscription that you could join those chat rooms. And there are a couple of subscriber only chat rooms to get you, closer access to our experts, quicker responses, as opposed to more or less crowdsourcing it from a large group of people. But you can join the Discord server for free. And we even had James White in there on Monday night.
Former Patriots Super Bowl winner.
Super Bowl MVP, former Badger. Great here. He was in there helping, chatting a little bit and answering fantasy questions. So yeah, it's free. Give it a shot. rotowire.com/chat for the Discord there here. And but if you do want to get to those subscriber only rooms, you can see it right down here. 15% off, YouTube 15.
There you go. Again, thank you for listening. Back in next week with hopefully everyone's Week 8 winning lineups. We'll have to see after Bye-Mageddon reeks its head, at least for another week. Thanks, everyone, again for listening.